Yeah, definitely. So I'm trying to think about what happened there were sort of some fairly major layout changes when we were initially sort of thinking about the model, like it was originally going to have air coming out the sides and then the power on the other side. And I think that it was power on the back, on the side, and air coming out the front by the submission for round one, the just digital sort of version of it. So that was sort of like it wasn't quite a major change because we hadn't already made the model, like we weren't done with the plumbing yet, but it was one that sort of we had to swap things around, and like it's like a puzzle, like you're putting all these different components in this place and trying to see what's the best configuration, but also thinking about like, does it make sense to have the power on like the front and the air coming out the back? Maybe that doesn't work. So that was a thing. There were like big pushes that needed to be made when we had sort of tamped down a assembly, like an internal assembly, to make the enclosure around it and make all that work. So that involved kind of like a lot of late night work by me because I was sort of doing the assembly parts, thinking sort of the whole piece. Then for the prototype, we had to like almost scrap this design. Not quite scrap, but like we rebuilt it from the ground up, basically. In a lot of 3D modeling, it is this sort of, when you're modeling a component that's sort of in progress and then things are changing, you end up with this sort of like leaning Tower of Pisa of like features, and where you're like, oh, this is too small, so I'm gonna cut it, and you end up with like very messy, in 3D modeling parametrically, there's like a timeline, so you can kind of roll back in time for like what you decided on, but which is great because then you can be like, I can just change the whole size. But if it's messy, then it'll just kind of explode almost literally into just random sketches and drawings in 3D space. So we had to rebuild the whole assembly from the ground up for round two, to sort of, now that we had a design done, like how would I model this knowing what the design is going to be at the end, as opposed to like figuring out as I go. Mm-hmm. There were some shifts again also in the plumbing directions. We had things like sort of weren't fitting in the volume that originally was designed. And also the user interface team, I believe, wanted to upgrade their screen to like a bigger screen that actually required like almost 2 inches of additional volume, in each direction, which seems like a huge change, but then I made a cardboard model of it. I was like, it's kind of the same thing. So all of those were different major changes, I guess, as the design went down.
Cool.
I think there was also a consideration to, Sprint 2 was a really interesting one for the CAD team. I sort of stopped being able to blow off my regular job. So we sort of like a lot less. Sprint 1, I had a lot more time to devote to this, and Sprint 2 was sort of like, because there was like the prototyping team, and so we ended up having to make sort of a prototype version of the design, one that would just be like, this is what we're going to actually make and test, versus this is our design that is using all of these other components, but like the actual outside is something that would require a little bit more, either different processes or more time, more sort of connection fiddling.